So next I am going to introduce the panel discussion. We have Exploration, Experimentation, Collaboration, 25 years of the Windgate International Residency Program. And this will be a discussion with the Center for Art and Wood's current artistic director, Jennifer Navva Milliken, and 4 panelists. Founded in 1995 as the Windgate International Turning Exchange, or ITE, this residency has become known as an annual benchmark for wood-oriented artists, makers, designers, curators, and researchers from all over the world. Leading the panel, we have Navva Milliken, who joined the center as artistic director in 2018. Prior to arriving in Philadelphia, she worked at the Bellevue Arts Museum in Washington State, the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, and the Museum of Arts and Design in New York. Her exhibitions have been presented in museums, art fairs, galleries, and unconventional spaces, and her writings have been published in books that investigate and critique the intersecting fields of craft, art, and design. For this panel discussion, Navva has invited 4 alumni resident fellows to provide a glimpse into this unique Philadelphia-sited residency experience. Let's welcome ITE fellows Max Brosi, Stefano Catalani, Vivian Chu, and Betty Scarpino and Navva for a conversation exploring the before, during, and after experiences sparked by the ITE. This talk accompanies the center's current exhibition, marking the 25-year milestone in the history of the Windgate Residency.
Thanks, Layla, and thank you everyone here at Craft Now Philadelphia for having us on today. It is a very auspicious moment in the history of the ITE residency program, being that the first time as we mark 25 years of the program, it is the first year that the program did not take place. So we can use this year to take a pause. We have a retrospective exhibition looking at 25 years of the residency program. And also we have the opportunity today to look ahead. Before I introduce panelists, I did want to thank a lot of people. The Center for Art and Wood, the Center for Art and Wood's co-founder and director emeritus, Albert Lekoff, who is here with us today. I want to thank all 160 plus fellows of the 25 years of the Winggate ITE residency. I want to thank the partners in the ITE program and the supporters who made it possible to continue for 25 years and onward. And of course, Craft Now Philadelphia, also to Vashti. It's a very tough act for us to follow, but we'll do our best. And we're really pleased to be here to participate in this locus of ideas and debate. And certainly we'll be taking Vashti's words with us, particularly about radical care, radical empathy, radical vulnerability, and I would add to that radical imagination as well. From a discussion about home to a discussion that is deliberately about not being home, I want to introduce 4 former ITE fellows. If we could move on to the next slide as we introduce them. First, Max Brosi, who is an artist fellow from 2017. Max is an artist and woodturner based in Northwest Ireland. Next slide, we have Stefano Catalani, scholar fellow in 2010, and a curator, a writer, a ceramist, and executive director of Gage Academy in Seattle. Vivian Chu, who is Artist Fellow 2018, which was my first year with the center and with the program as well. Vivian is an artist and adjunct professor at Virginia Commonwealth University and joins us today from Richmond, Virginia. And Betty Scarpino, Artist Fellow in 1999 and Photojournalist Fellow in 2016. Betty is one of our very, very few, very elite group of fellows who have 2-timed the ITE program. And Betty is an artist, woodturner, and writer and editor based in Indianapolis, Indiana. So I believe we're going to include ITE accounts and bio information in the chat so that we can get started with our panel. And I'm just gonna dive into it. We do have a few images of ITE in action just to set a context, so we could start to flip through those images while we start the discussion. First off is the first brochure for the first inaugural program in 1995. And you'll see that Albert has written on the top, research, exploration, collaboration, the three guiding values of the program, which continue through today. So I can't see our panelists, but I know they're here. So I'm just going to open up with a question for all of them to tackle. And that is in line with the theme of this symposium, Cultures of Making, which is also the title of the publication released last year by Craft Now Philadelphia. What role do arts residencies play in the careers of artists and researchers? And what kind of cultures do they foster? Don't be shy.
Okay, I'll speak up first. In 1999, when I did the first residency, I was mostly working locally and connecting with my local wood turning friends and club members. And what the residency did for me was expand that culture for me, expand my understanding of what other wood turners were doing around the world, because we had somebody from France and two from France and one from Australia. When I did the residency as a photojournalist in 2016, I have a very different feeling about it because I felt as though I was bringing some of that culture instead of absorbing it as kind of a novice. I was bringing a little bit of a different culture to the IT experience because of my now background as an editor, writer, and as a sculptor beyond wood turning. So for me, it's changed personally, along with the ITE residency itself changing over time.
Thanks, Betty.
Well, I can jump in. There are not many residencies for scholars or curators, so this was a very welcome invitation for me to join in 2010. I think it was very humbling as an experience. As I walked into the first, as a scholar, you do not join the artist for the whole length of the residency, but it was about the last 10 days of the program. And so you arrive and I think the culture really exists, but you have to you're walking into this sort of like big, broader room where all sorts of relationships are going on, partnerships and collaborations. But it was fascinating humbling because first of all, there's so much to learn from the artists who have spent years in refining their vision, and their relationship with the material. And there is a complete different take. All of a sudden you have to strip bare of your preconceived ideas about the material that you might have written about, or you might have analyzed from an aesthetic perspective, and actually being invited to take the gouge and get to the lathe, which is like this jet engine that is making an incredible noise, and trying to have a conversation with the material. It was incredibly eye-opening and enriching. And I've not been able to write about wood after that in the same way, meaning that now I understand the nuances and the unforgiveness of this material. And also I want to, I always think about Ezra Pound when he said that technique is the test of sincerity. And I think that's true. I think that being able to understand how the artists have developed over the years, their technique, it actually speaks of their authenticity and their sincerity. And being in the room with this amazing roster of international artists and seeing their different approaches, different cultural perspectives on a same material, it was really enriching.
Stefano, I just want to mention that when I first arrived at Bellevue Arts Museum, I think it was the very first week, I'll never forget, and I think about this all the time to this day, because now I'm at the Center for Art and Wood, but one of the first things that you recommended to me was to check out the possibilities of this residency program. And at the time I knew about the Center for Art and Wood, but I didn't know about the residency. And since then, I've really kind of made it a focus to learn about any opportunities for curators and writers in the residency space. And it remains one of the very few that offers an opportunity, particularly for embedding a curator, writer, researcher within that space of technique and action happening, and shavings, of course. And we'll get to the images that involve the creative use of shavings in all forms. And here's Stefano's work, collaborative work right here. I also, oh, go ahead, Stefano.
No, I mean, thank you for, you know, for those of you who know me personally, I cook a lot and I post a lot about food. And food is about community, and craft is about community, and it's about shared experience. And so for me, it was almost natural to make pasta out of wood shavings and invite all the other artists to partake in this sculpture installation, and kind of like metaphorically give flesh to the experience of working together, at least for me, for 10 days with them. So that was really a remarkable experience for me. Yeah.
And one thing that I didn't bring up is that Stefano and Betty came into the residency before the expansion of the mission of the Center for Art and Wood. So at that time, it was still the Wood Turning Center, and very much about the use of that tool, the lathe, and the vessel, and the making of these sort of round objects turned on in access, and the creative potential behind that. And I wonder if you and Betty, and then of course Max and Vivian as well, could jump in and talk about what that change and that shift represents or has represented for the course and the evolution of the residency program, and for the Center for Wood as well.
I think it's been really great for the wood turning community. It's opened it up. It's pretty frightening for some of the older generation wood turners who haven't embraced working beyond the roundness of the lathe. I had that concept to begin with, wanting to do something besides turn a round object. And so I was helping move the field, and also being part of that movement, having it affected me. I think it's enriched it a lot, changed the culture from old white guys working on the lathe to a more inclusive aspect of who gets to be one of the residents and what the kind of work that gets done.
Thank you. I definitely want to loop back into that discussion as we get into the course of the conversation. But I also would like to invite Vivian and Max, who came in after the expansion of the organization into Center for Art and Wood, and perhaps that was a very different experience for you, or perhaps not. Max is a wood turner, and then of course Vivian as a sculptural artist.
I thought Max wanted to talk. I thought, so your first question about the culture of the ITE, which leads back into the expansion of the program to be more inclusive. I think what is special about the ITE program is the diversity. When I was there, we had different demographics in race, in gender, in age, which I think was really important. And just the idea of having a scholar as well as a student resident and then a photojournalist resident really kind of pushed a sharing and allowed us all to really push our own work to include new ideas and techniques that we learned there. I'm actually doing some turning now, thinking back to how I was, dabbling a little bit at the ITE and meeting a lot of people in Philadelphia, like the wood community has been really great, especially during this time when a lot of us are teachers and we're trying to share how to possibly teach woodworking online. So I think the sharing is really important. And then I was currently in a grad program while I was at the ITE, which was interdisciplinary. And I had done a lot of residencies, which were mostly sculptural based or a wood area as part of a larger residency program. So this was really the one program that was niche for woodworkers that allowed all of us to share common ground and specific knowledge that other residencies wouldn't have talked about, like finish or, just kind of nerding out on woodworking. And that was really great having all those different demographics there. So that was a great residency for me. And talking with you, Navva, since you are a scholar and have a lot of ideas of how to push the woodworking and craft forward. So that was really helpful.
Well, thanks, Vivian. I'm certainly enriched every single day from the existence of this program.
Could I come in there?
Please do.
Hi. Okay, for me, from my perspective, I'm an only child that grew up in the northwest of Ireland in a very rural community, and my studio or my workshop is at the side of my house. I look out over valleys and mountains and trees and so on. Come and live and meet the collectors, meet fellow artists, exchange ideas and collaborate with them. That to me was probably the main strength of the residency.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad that you could join us today. And thank you for wearing your Center for Art and Wood t-shirt. I want to go back to this idea that Vivian brought up of the balance between specificity of the material and then a universality of voices that comes from having people working in different practices, including those on the production wood turning side or functional craft side, as well as those who are working maybe in fields like architecture or sculpture or new media, but still coming together through the context of making and material. So what kinds of discussions or what kind of challenges that bring to you, or the complexity does that bring to you when you think about your own work?
Well, I currently teach furniture design here at VCU, and I do not make furniture at all. And when I was at ITE, we had Michael Purier, who was making furniture. We had Cha Jong Ray, who was making sculpture, and I was making more sculptural things. And it was really, we were pushing each other to do other things other than what we were doing now. And I think the amount of time we were there really pushed collaboration. I don't know if you showed, but we turned corn on the cob on the lathe, so we're just having fun and experimenting with a lot of things without really the pressure to create anything. That being said, the great thing about the residency was that there was an exhibition at the end, which was really open to all our kind of experimental works. That's kind of different from other exhibitions that have a lot of pressure to kind of show who you are as an artist. This really kind of focused on the residency and not, the art and final projects, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think one aspect of the question was how does this kind of multiplicity of voices joined together by one material, how does that color the conversations that are had, and then maybe, and I'm referring to some correspondence that we had between us in email about how questions of craft and the way it's traditionally been assigned hierarchies in terms in the wider scope of arts and making, how does the way the residency has evolved and taken shape, how does that, has that provided opportunities for artists working in traditional craft fields to think differently about their work, or has it solidified the work, the way they see their work in terms of the use of the material of wood and heritage practices or techniques of making?
Well, when you invoke the word wood, I think people who aren't familiar with working with wood, just, I'm not sure what they think, maybe a wooden table, some wooden structure for a home. But when a person actually delves into wood itself and explores the material beyond what our preconceived ideas are, that opens up possibilities. And as far as the academic part of it, for the most part, wood, especially wood turning, has not been based in an academic setting until very, very recently. And so when somebody says, well, I'm a ceramic artist, we understand that academically from universities and art programs. We don't necessarily understand that about wood. So what kind of wood do we have? A wood artist or a wood turner, furniture maker in an academic setting. So the center focusing on wood can expand that understanding and knowledge of what that word means to a variety of different people.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Betty. I think wood is a material that is very versatile and historically has been associated with construction, making home, serving food, building stretchers for the sick. I think has been used to make containers, but I think that such a richness of associations is something that I felt, at least when I was in 2010, the ITE residency was there, because not all the artists that were included at that time were actually woodturners. I think Wonjo Park, South Korean artist, was a sculptor, and she was actually gluing together painstakingly these little bits of wood to make incredible frames that were slightly off, that were not square, that for an OCD would have been crazy to look at. But her process was so meticulous and so repetitious, to a point almost becoming a Zen mantra, that was actually healing, I think, for it would be very healing today in this climate, to keep our minds off other news. So I don't know. I think I agree with Betty. I think that wood not necessarily is related to wood turning. It's not the first thing probably that people would think of. Design as use wood for creating many objects. So I think that expanding the mission and not limiting the experience of the ITE to wood turning actually just recognizes that richness and that versatility and that expansive field of uses and techniques.
Thank you.
Navva, can I jump in there for
I
a second?
will. Yes, thank you.
Great. I should explain, I think through wood, and I express myself through wood, through working with wood in all different guises. And I was quite lucky when I started off in wood turning that I stumbled across quite, I guess I could say, different and sculptural narrative. And I'd go as far as to say, it was the interconnection of cylinders at all different angles to express social concepts about society and terrorism and so on. And I have to say, after a while, it tired me out using that medium as such a narrative. And going into the ITE, one of the things I wanted to do was take it back a step. Maybe I went at this in the reverse direction that most people would. They'd start with something quite basic and build up to sculpture after years or whatever. I did it the other way. And I remember saying to Albert, I want to actually calm things down and see wood and see my practice almost as a meditation, making simple things like the world is quite crazy at the moment, as we all know. And applying intellectual concepts to my sculpture, it kind of tired me out and it made me feel, yeah, tired. So what I wanted to do was make something that's much more instinctive and beautiful. And people will probably laugh. I went to the vessel, which is what everyone associates with wood turning. And I spent the next 3 years after the ITE trying to put my own stamp on the vessel and make the vessel my own. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but I've tried to tie it into the evolution of the center and how, I suppose, the center evolving has made me evolve as well.
That's really, I'm finding that fascinating to hear that, Max, because I, as one person, really didn't understand what you were doing during that ITE experience, because I really love your cylinders and how they're connected and how they speak of the wider audience politically, especially. And then you do this ITE experience and you start making vessels again. I did not understand that. And so I'm glad to hear your explanation. But if anybody hasn't seen Max's pre-ITE work, I hope that you go to his website and take a look at some of the work that he did, because it's pretty powerful and speaks to our political situation today.
Thanks, Betty. I will also mention that you can come see it at the Center for Art and Wood, because the exhibition opened last week or the week before, and it's viewable online as well as on site. And so we're really very privileged to bring it into the public space again in this discussion. But also it is poignant what you mentioned, Max, about coming to the residency and having, being in the incongruously bustling, probably very sweaty city of Philadelphia, in the center of it, and taking the opportunity to create space of thinking around your work, and then return to the sort of more meditative aspects of practice. Usually, it like Betty mentioned, it goes the other way, that work becomes a little. It becomes an experience of kind of fragmenting the way that you think about your work and you think through your practice. And then, and there are many examples in the exhibition as well, where we have a section called Breakthroughs, and that's where somebody who has been creating the same type of work comes out of the residency completely changing that way of working. So I'm glad to know that it happens on a continuum as well.
It does, and in my case, in reverse order. But I just felt what I needed personally as an artist, and I think what the world needed, was more calm rather than more analyzing, analytical, intellectual sculpture. I mean, those pebble vessels that I'm making now, they're carved. The carved texture, to me, reflects art. So they're, like you said, very meditative and quiet and calm. That was my intention, because that's what was missing from my life. So sorry to make this about me. Sorry, back to you.
But the culture of the residency itself allows for that. We don't have to do anything in particular when we go into the residency. Like, you have to make new work, you can go back and make older work.
And I think that's really what the humbling part for me was. I think a lot of scholars, and especially craft academicians, often approach a medium or a craft with specific ideas that have been built in over years of studies and readings and discussions within the discourse of the field. I think instead, having that full immersion and direct, unfiltered experience with the material, especially if you get a gouge and you have to say, okay, now try to work on this lathe and on this piece of wood, and experiencing their conversations, collaborations, explorations that are happening within the workshop. I think what it did for me, it completely deflated those preconceived ideas that were sort of a frame of reference for me to approach the medium, approach the work of the artist. And so I think that's incredibly beneficial. I don't want to make an inflammatory statement here, although probably you would like that, but I think that this residency for me was really about taking down some preconceived approaches to what the medium would have to mean or would have to be interpreted as. And so it really it was an unfiltered, raw exposure to understanding visually, emotionally, radically, the medium, but also through the collaborations and the discussions with the fellow colleagues who were there, the artists, and realizing my maybe well-read knowledge of the medium from all the articles and essays read over the years, but my very poor basic knowledge of the medium in itself. So those negotiations were really critical for me on a personal level.
I guess that's another example of the uniqueness of this program, is that not only does it offer a fellowship position for curators and writers, but it also encourages curators and writers to get their hands dirty in the proverbial sense, but also in the literal sense. And so I don't know if everyone takes advantage of that opportunity, but it is certainly important for understanding the process of creation, the process of working through a technique. I want to invite people in the audience to submit your questions in the chat, and I will dance back and forth if you have questions for the panelists or about the program. But I do want to devote a little bit of time to the city of Philadelphia, where this place-based residency occurs. It is not your typical bucolic pastoral escape. It is really putting 7 artists in very close quarters into the center of the city, which has been reported to me in various times as being loud, chaotic, energetic, frenetic. And then artists are in the residency for 8 weeks. And as Vivian mentioned, there is an exhibition at the end of it. So there is constant pressure to create something that is exhibition ready. So how does this, I don't know, fuel your work or your thinking through your work while you're on the residency?
Well, I'd like to just mention that in 1999, the residency was at the George School, which was in rural Bucks County, and we used a high school wood shop, and the 5 of us, the 4 artists and then the photojournalists, stayed in a farmhouse together and cooked meals together. And we had the grounds to walk on. I think I felt more pressured by that than I did in 1999 when I was at the residency, because it was downtown. It was at the University of the Arts, which I really enjoyed because it brought more enthusiasm for me and helped energize my work and made me feel more connected than having it be in a bucolic setting. And yes, it was loud and it was noisy, but I never lived in a downtown like that. And I knew I would eventually get to go home, but I enjoyed it. It's energizing.
Vivian, you had mentioned the exhibition, so I'd love to hear your description of that process and preparing for it.
Well, about being in the city, I'm from Hong Kong, so I grew up in the city, and I never thought it was possible to kind of be an artist in the city. So it was kind of like, it can happen. But it was also sometimes the bucolic nature can be distracting. So it was very much like, I guess we're going to work now for the whole day. So that was actually great for me. And we also had a lot of field trips. We went to Nakashima's workshop, and we went to, we saw some collectors in DC, which was really great, and Mark Spheri's studio. So it wasn't all city and working. The exhibition was great because as an artist who does a lot of residencies, I don't show very much. So it was a good opportunity for me to show work and really kind of get back into niche woodworking. As I said, I was in a grad program at that time, and I had some pressure to kind of move away from woodworking because it was so interdisciplinary. So it kind of allowed me to kind of get back to the roots of my work. And I actually did, the image you saw, Inclination, was a kind of expanding from work I did back in 2010. So I was really allowed to do, kind of remake some of that work. The exhibition space is large, and aside from the residency exhibitions, the programming at the Center for Art and Wood is great. There's a lot of space, and there is a collection upstairs, a library of work that previous wood artists have done. So, and that was always available to us for inspiration. So we would always come and look at what other people have done and kind of expand our kind of encyclopedia of artists who are working in the same field. So that was always great. And yeah, it was just like a great network of meeting a lot of local artists, and it was right by the Clay Center too. So it was very good for kind of understanding the scene in Philadelphia and how open everyone is to sharing. Yeah.
I do want to mention that there are a couple of other fellows who are not on this panel but are with us today. So I definitely welcome their insights as well. Elizabeth and Jennifer Zwilling, I'm thinking about you. And also Albert, I'd love to hear from Albert today as well. I did want to jump back to something that came up earlier and discussing access. The residency is one of the most subsidized residencies that I'm aware of. On the other hand, there is still a divide in who can participate in an arts residency and who can't, for a number of reasons. First of all, being able to be released for 2 months of time and just ability to get away. And so I constantly occupied with this question of how do we do better in making the residency available to a wider scope of artists in this field.
Could I jump in there, Navva?
You do not have to
No, but maybe somebody else wants to. No, but what I'm thinking is, I'm not sure you can do better, because aside from it almost getting me kicked out of the house and sleeping on the couch for a year afterwards, everything was provided on the residency. Foreign travel was provided, pressure was removed. You're in a space where you have no domestic chores to do, you have no rent to pay as such, because you're put up in the student digs. You really have that headspace and the physical space to think about work and create work. And you mentioned earlier about the pressure of the exhibition. I remember clearly Albert saying to me, Max, you're not under any pressure. If you come into the exhibition and you tip out a big bag of shavings at the end of the residency, I'm happy as long as your horizons have expanded and you've had new thoughts. And I was a bit disappointed with myself going home, because like Betty alluded to, before that I'd been doing very much kind of narrative sculptural pieces, and here I'd produced a body of vessels, and I was thinking, Max, was that a bit of a cop-out? Did you not go far enough, and so on? But again, Albert said, don't worry about that. It's a year, it's 2 years down the line when the impact of the ITE is going to leak its way out of your brain into your sketchbooks and onto your lathe. And that has happened.
Yes.
That's really true, since I'm turning right now, and I haven't done that since the ITE.
And in your cohort, the Shajongwe turned for the very first time, and that work is actually in the center's permanent collection, and it's on view in the exhibition as well. And we were just speaking about it today with the staff and how beautiful it is. Those bursts of inspiration that come from hands to material are just snapshots that are very, very important and offer us insights and our community's insights, because of course that collection is in our public trust.
I think it's also important to note that the center works pretty hard to create an international, exchange. So Chajang Rose from Korea, our scholar, Sean was from Ireland. I'm from Hong Kong. So it really kind of showed us what people are doing with wood internationally.
That's a very important aspect of this program, absolutely. I want to be sure that we end or at least touch on the aspect of what it means to take this with us and respond to the idea of residencies in this time. This has been a very revealing year for us in many ways. I mentioned earlier that this is the first year in the residency's history that it hasn't taken place. And so here and now we're having this conversation about place and being removed and bringing your practice to another place. Is being through or in the midst of this situation, 2020, how do we connect with thinking about being in different places and experiences in a post-COVID, post-2020 world?
Well, of course, through symposiums like this, getting together with like-minded people to share our life stories and to hear other people's enthusiasm and excitement. So I think these Zoom sessions are, they are and they have been very important to me in connecting to the outside world, because I'm pretty socially isolated right now. So I just think this internet connection is essential.
A lifeline.
I think that, oh, pardon me.
No, go ahead.
No, I think actually that these conversations, especially these symposia that take place over the online platform, actually are much more inclusive than symposia that would, before COVID, allow people to travel to a city for the conference, but also had limitations in terms of accessibility. And not every student, not every artist or would possibly have the means to find lodging and then transportation. And I think that I'm hoping that this new paradigm of coming around the table virtually, like we're doing now, to engage in conversations, will remain after, even well after the pandemic is behind us, hopefully, or definitely will be something that I would love to continue, even on a personal practice, to engage with, just because I believe that it is a way to really bypass barriers that exist, no matter what, when we are gathering in one place.
Well, I tell you, the Woodturners have that figured out. The American Association of Woodturners, their virtual conference in June was very well attended, and by many people who would not have been able to go in person. And then last weekend, David Ellsworth, who was one of the elders of the turning field, he did an online Zoom session. I think it was maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours long. There were 1,700 people who signed up and attended that session. And many of them would not ever have been able to go and see David in person, but they could talk to him and see him sort of live right there on their screen. We also have a website that is dedicated to teaching people how to use to record themselves with video, to share themselves with the right kind of equipment, computers, programs. It's called Lucid Woodturners. If you ever want to know anything about how to connect virtually, you go to their website, you join them, and any question will be answered. So the Woodturners, the woodworkers are leading the field with virtual presentations and connections.
Yes, yeah, we have a lot to learn.
Oh, and they charge, the AEW, they charge $10 a piece to come and see David Ellsworth. 1,700 people showed up. That's a lot of money into their coffers to help other kinds of programming. So it can be done and help foster and create connections for the future.
Does it make sense to think about residencies as being mergers of these kinds of tools and opportunities that take place in a space, but also in a universal space?
I think the world's a rapidly changing place. And as everybody's mentioned already, there are so many advantages to digital symposia and so on. And I've attended a few, but I also teach in a local college here, and we were faced with the concept of having to teach online, and nothing made me more scared than that, because as I mentioned, I communicate through wood. I'm a touchy-feely person. I like the feeling and the smell and sometimes even the taste of the materials. So what all this has done for me, it made me long to get to the physical demonstrations and symposia and residencies more and more and more.
Yeah, that's poignant. Certainly, we have learned that navigating that bridge between sharing space with artwork and viewing it on digital space there's still that gap there. But I thank you so much, everyone, for coming together. It's been a pleasure to see you all here. It's definitely colliding different parts of my life and different eras in my life, as well as in the centers and in the history of the residency. So I thank you so much, everyone, for your comments. I do want to mention one comment that's in the chat, and that is from Jennifer Zwilling, who was the scholar in 2000, I want to say 14, I might be wrong about that. And she wrote that Betty's comment made her think of Vashti's point that in order to be universal, we must be specific, and that we must share ourselves in order to connect with others. And I think that's the perfect note to end on. So thank you so much. And thank you, Craft Now, for giving us this platform to talk about the Windgate ITE residency program.
Good to be here. Thanks, everybody.
Be safe.
Everyone.
Thank you from Ireland.
Thanks, Max.